Well, hello, folks. Jeffrey Darty, the Christian whistleblower, back with you for a brand new series. And if you missed the epic, the Prophet Daniel, Mandela Effect, and Antichrist series, it is there on a playlist. And you can also see the videos individually right here on my spectacular YouTube channel. And please subscribe before you go. And you can also find on jeffreydarty.com, which is right down there, the ebook that contains all the information in the videos, plus some bonus information that we just simply did not have time to cover. Now, I need to say this before I talk about what we're going to talk about today. For 20 years, I preached the Bible, I preached Jesus, and it was my life. I was a full-time Christian minister. I'm a Bible college graduate. I have over 100,000 hours of study in the biblical text. They say 10,000 hours of studying any subject makes you an expert. So whatever 100,000 hours makes me, well, that's up to you to decide. But I did discover that the Bible contains about 80% dung and about 20% diamond. But today I stand more convinced and more enthusiastic about the Bible as a source of study for those seeking true spiritual enlightenment than I did when I believed in the whole thing. So even though 80% of it is dung and 20% of it is diamond, the New Testament, the Bible, continues to be a great source for study for those that are seeking true spiritual enlightenment. And today, I am more dedicated to the teachings, beliefs of Yeshua than I've ever been, and I am more dedicated to following and living in concordance with the teachings of Yeshua. So this is going to be controversial. Some of you with little baby tummies may not even get through the first 5 minutes. Well, if you can't get through the first 5 minutes, it's best that you just go ahead and go back and watch some singing contest or who gets voted off the island, because it's probably not for you in that case. Our subject matter, Jesus is the Antichrist. That's right. Jesus is the Antichrist. And you're going to see that there's a great gulf between Yeshua and Jesus, mainly because Jesus wasn't real. And before you get mad, I believed for 30, 40 years Jesus was real. And it wasn't until I began to do some objective study that I found out that there's something wrong in the state of Denmark, to crib a Shakespearean note. I noticed and discovered in my studies that there is absolutely zero empirical objective evidence for the life of Jesus. A cold, hard, objective look at historical facts shows that the only evidence for the life of Jesus is found within the pages of the New Testament. And to say the New Testament is true because the New Testament says it's true is an intellectual ludicrosity. To say Jesus lived because the Bible says that he lived is an intellectual ludicrosity. We must do better than that. We've got to find some evidence. If we believe that the central figure of our faith was a real person, then he should have left a mark somewhere in history. And unfortunately, even biblical scholars, such as the noted scholar J.D. Crossman, says that attempts to document a historical Jesus amount to an academic embarrassment. That's one of the leading biblical scholars. Attempts to document the historical Jesus are an academic embarrassment. And many of you already are mad right now, but let me tell you something. The love you have for Jesus is not really for Jesus, it's for Yeshua. The dedication that you have to Jesus is not really to Jesus, it's to Yeshua. And the affection that and the connection you feel to Jesus isn't really to Jesus, it's to Yeshua. So hang on. Even the most ardent supporters of the historical life of Jesus can only point to three really very cryptic extra biblical sources. Raphael Latasser, who's a tutor in religious studies at Sydney University, talks about three non-biblical, non-Christian sources. And he says only Roman scholar Josephus, who wrote in a book called Antiquities, actually a series of books, and the historian Tacitus, who wrote a book called the Annals, which if you're a true scholar, you probably have it in your library. Only Josephus and Tacitus of non-biblical and non-Christian scholars and historians have any claim to have written about Jesus within 100 years of his life. Think about that. Jesus walking the earth, and there's only two dudes that wrote one word about him within 100 years of his life. And even those accounts, Lataster says, are shrouded in controversy because there's disagreements over what parts have been changed by Christians, because these manuscripts, he says, were preserved by Christians. And the fact that both these authors were born after Jesus died, and he says would have probably received their information from Christians. And the oddity that centuries go by before Christian apologists start referencing them. Can you imagine what this man is saying? There's only two people, secular extra-biblical writers, that wrote one word about Jesus within 100 years of his lifetime. And even those two are shrouded in controversy. Now, I would add the Mera Bar-Serapian letter, which was about AD 73. But even of those three sources, Tacitus is considered to be the most credible and the most reliable. And here's what Tacitus said. You ready? I'm going to give you the whole talk, everything that Tacitus ever wrote about Jesus, Tacitus being regarded as the most reliable non-biblical source on the life of Jesus. Here's everything he wrote. Christus, for whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hand of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. That's it, folks. That is the most credible, most reliable writing about Jesus outside the Bible as far as him being a real living person. That's it. But even the very best extra-biblical proof of the crucifixion, of the life of Jesus, is hotly debated by scholars. Even conservative writers like James Still have problems with the authenticity of the Tacitus passage. For one, Tacitus, this guy says, was an imperial writer. He says no imperial document would ever refer to Jesus as the Christ. I tend to agree with him. Also, Pilate was not a procurator, but a prefect. And a Roman would not have made that mistake. Nevertheless, not willing to throw out the entire passage, some researchers have concluded that Tacitus was repeating a story told to him by contemporary Christians. So there you have again. The Bible's true because the Bible says it's true. The Bible says Jesus lived, so we believe because the Bible said Jesus lived, that Jesus lived when. That's called circular reasoning, and it's intellectual ludicrosity, my friends and my foes. The fact is that what is put forward as the very best evidence for the life of Jesus is either doctored or forged. And this is the thing that really blows my mind, and we're probably going to end with this today because this is just so much for people to try to understand and take into their brain. There's a guy named Philo, and he was a prolific writer, and he lived in or around Jerusalem the entire time that Jesus was there. Philo lived in or around Jerusalem the entire time that Jesus allegedly was there. Think about it. This guy lived in or around Jerusalem the entire time that Jesus was alleged to have been there. And he was a prolific writer. And yet the man said not one word about Jesus. How is that possible? And let me just share something with you real quickly so you can see and know that this is in fact reality. Look at what we're talking about here. This is Wikipedia. Philo of Alexandria. He lived from 25 BCE, before the Christian era, till 50 CE. If you believe most people, Jesus would have been crucified by 32, or maybe the guy lived during the time of Jesus. That's the important thing. He lived in Jerusalem during the time of Jesus. And yet, the man wrote not one single word about Jesus. And for that matter, he wrote not one single word about Yeshua. But think about it. You believe and were taught by Bible history that Jesus was born miraculously, that he was crucified spectacularly, that he rose from the freaking dead. And yet, one of the greatest writers of the era that lived in the same city didn't say one word about this miracle man. Didn't say one word about Yeshua either. And also, folks, check this out. He wrote a history of the Judeans in the first century. Not one word about Jesus. Not one word about Yeshua. Now, that's exactly what you would expect from a Roman author towards a Jewish teacher. Remember, history is written by the winners, and the winners don't want to talk about the rabble-rousers and the people that cause problems. So the fact that he wouldn't have talked about Yeshua, who, you know, probably was a minor Jewish prophet. Yeah, he caused some trouble, ruffled a few feathers, but a Roman would have ignored him. We can see that makes perfect sense. But to ignore a guy that was born of a virgin, to ignore a guy that was crucified by the Romans in a great big huge show trial, ignore a guy that rose from the dead, not say a word about it when you're writing a history of that time, makes no sense. Makes no sense. Not one bit of sense, my friends. How can these things be? How can these things be true? How can these things be real? How could Jesus have been a living, breathing person walking on planet Earth for 3.5 years in Judea, where Philo lived, where hundreds of historians lived, and not one word, save for those three little references that are cloudy at best? Folks, the objective empirical evidence is that Jesus was not real. I believe Yeshua not being talked about makes perfect sense, because his writings are cataloged in other extra biblical places, and he wasn't teaching what this Jesus dude was teaching. And tomorrow we're going to get into the differences, and we're going to get into how, when Jesus was created, when Jesus was brought into being, by whom he was brought into being by. But try to take your mind out of it. Try to take the ego, and try to take your training. I mean, Twain's words have never proven more true here. It's much easier to fool someone than to convince someone they've been fooled. You've been fooled into believing in this person named Jesus. You've been fooled into believing that he's a real person. And here I am trying to prove to you that you've been fooled. And it's not easy, but that doesn't mean I'm going to stop trying. Zero historical, empirical, objective evidence for a person named Jesus being a real person. And yet, I'm going to show you, starting tomorrow, that this Jesus is the Antichrist. How in the world, Jeff? That doesn't make sense. Well, you know what? Hang on, my brother. Hang on, my sister, because we are just getting started. I'm Jeffrey Daugherty, the Christian whistleblower, inviting you to be back tomorrow as we continue this stunning series. Before you leave, subscribe. Before you leave, like the video. Before you leave, share this video. I'm Jeffrey Daugherty, the Christian whistleblower, doing my best to bring you some peace, doing my best to bring you some light, and more than anything else, hoping you'll take the initiative to unindoctrinate yourself.